It's an abiding truth that this is what power finally comes to. It wasn't until I read about it years later that I realized I began life here under the rule of an old-style political boss. But through the decade of the 30s, this really was, as it's been called, Tom's Town. Until 1939, when he went to federal prison at Leavenworth for tax evasion, T.J. Pendergast wielded power that reached beyond the city, beyond the State House, all the way to Washington. His main business interest was ready-mix concrete, and it was no accident that Boss Tom Cement went into many of the public projects of the time. But his real authority was exercised from a second-floor desk in his political office at 1908 Main. Dave Wheeler remembers going there often with his father, Frank, who was accountant for Pendergast's business empire, and who, like many, saw the boss as a kind of Robin Hood.
They actually, I guess, broke into the Fred Wolfman's warehouse over on Carnes Boulevard, off of Roanoke there, and they would take the choice products such as the turkeys and the canned hams and that, and they would put them in bushel baskets, and then at Christmas time they'd have the park board trucks, the old green park board trucks would load up, and they would take those down and put them on the curbside. And Mr. Tom would follow up in a big black car, and you'd think the Pope was coming down the street.
Generous as he might have been to his friends and political allies, Pendergast was known for his explosive nature, a temper to match his girth.
On my desk is the stapler that my father gave me, and said that was on Mr. Pendergast's desk, but he said this thing has bounced off of many a notable, Harry Truman, Governor Stark, or anything, because when the old gentleman blew his fuse, if this was within reach, it went for a ride.
In our family and among their friends, Pendergast was considered to be a god.
He was strong enough to bring a lot of federal money to Kansas City to provide jobs. That's when the City Hall was built, that's when the courthouse was built, and that's when the convention center was built.
My little sister didn't have a doll, neither did I, and so I wrote him a letter, and I told him that she never had owned a doll, and he sent her a doll, a little blue coat and blue hat, and fur on the hat.
Oh, Pendergast was a bad man, but then I'd be on the streetcar or bus, and I'd see lines of people waiting to be fed by the Pendergast people. And so that impressed me a lot.
The only reason he gave his people overcoats and had a soup kitchen so they could get their votes, as far as I could see.
Because the old motto in those days was vote early and vote often.
Tom Pendergast spent most of his prison time in the infirmary and came back a year later a sick and diminished man. The boss's fall and the corruption that was revealed fired the city with a zeal for reform. It also spelled the beginning of the end of Kansas City's era as a rip-roaring, anything-goes town, a time that evokes mixed feelings from those who lived it.
The town was wide open, man. Everybody was having a good time. They had slot machines practically in the delicatessens and grocery store and everything else like that, you know. Everybody made a little bone, nobody spoke except your politicians.
There was blind pigs all over town, and you didn't have to knock on the door and say, Joe sent me. They just opened the door and let you in.
You'd go downtown and you could do or see anything you were big enough to do if you had enough money to do it.
Early on, when I could have gone to the Chesterfield Club, where they were topless and I suspect bottomless, I never was in the place. I was a damn fool. I was at the age when that would have meant something.
There was a lot of whiskey making in those days, stills. I can recall the cry that went through the neighborhood, El Governo, El Governo. You know what that means? Government agents, the government agents.
At the Journal-Post, a man showed up there one day selling Gordon's gin. Later on, we found out it was made in a bathtub at the LaSalle Hotel.
The rowdy pleasures of that period had not come without a price, and that price was danger, even sudden death. Sometimes the innocent got caught tragically in the crossfire. Rosalie Strada and her family were walking home from church one March Sunday along Independence Avenue.
These two men came out of a saloon, shooting at each other. We thought my dad got clear, ran as he ran, but he didn't. He was killed right there. 53 years old. 8 of us still at home.
Other times, the violence was more public. 2 Kansas City Star writers, Richard Fowler and Henry Haskell, called the submachine gun the new voice of the 1930s.
I'd just gotten in the receiving ward at General Hospital when a phone call came in. They said send an ambulance to Union Station. There'd been a shooting. When I got there were dead people all around.
Jack Bradbury, a young reporter for the Journal-Post, was one of the first on the scene. Lawmen transporting federal prisoner Frank Nash had been ambushed that June morning in 1933 by mobsters who evidently hoped to free their hoodlum associate. A gun battle erupted, and 5 men, including Nash, were cut down by a hail of fire in what would become known as the Union Station Massacre, a mythic event in the city's violent history of that time.
I had an uncle, he's passed on, he was there. He used to talk to us about it. In fact, he said had it not been for the fact he knew how to hit the ground real fast, he would probably have been a part of that massacre.
But for all the seaminess and danger of those wide-open days, one thing has to be said for them. They provided a climate for the flourishing of a true art form. Traveling upriver from its birthplace in New Orleans, jazz found a new voice here in the works of the likes of Benny Moten, Count Basie, Mary Lou Williams, and Kansas City's legend of legends, Charlie Parker. For years to come, music would rule this city's nights.
Oh man, it was jazz everywhere. Just everywhere it was music.
We were young and exploratory, and so we would venture out into these places.
At 12 o'clock, we'd barge into the brewery. Now that was the main lead place.
I remember the Reno Club, and they would get pretty good bands there.
On 12th Street, you walk in one joint, you fall in another one. Walk out that joint, you fall in another.
When we get finished in town, the clubs close at 1 o'clock. Then we go to the county, to Tuesday Mayfair, and especially Half a Hill, where the Scamps were. And we used to go out there, and then they had a place called, out there 103rd and Central, I think it was called the Zombie Club. And you go out there, and when you leave there, you are a zombie.
Milt Abel discovered the Kansas City jazz scene on weekend leaves as a young soldier at Fort Leonard Wood. He stayed to become one of its notables. For my generation, there are fine memories of evenings spent at a little club on Truce, the Golden Horseshoe. There, for 20 years, Milt and his wife Betty Miller held forth on bass and piano for devoted crowds that came not to party, but to listen. For Milt, the music didn't end with the nightly gig at the Horseshoe. There were the all-night jam sessions at the Musicians' Union Hall, sessions that seldom ended until the sun was up. Kansas City's jazz heyday may have passed, but those who'd been a part of it still had a wealth of memories to share.
He said, you should have been here back in the 40s. Well, I said, if I'd been here in the 40s, I would have killed myself. I would never got any sleep.
The town, known for its rollicking nightlife, had a more conventional life as well. One that revolved around the vigorous downtown, a business and commercial district that was a magnet for all who lived here.
The first skyscraper we had was the telephone building, then the federal building, and then the Power and Light building.
Oh, I remember when you couldn't walk on 12th Street, on Main Street. During lunch hour, it was impossible to walk.
I liked the bustle of downtown. I liked the feeling of the urban center down there.
You went to restaurants downtown. You went to theater downtown. All the movie houses were downtown.
I remember going to the old Schubert. I saw Will Rogers at the Schubert in the Orpheum, which is in the same block with the Mulebuck Hotel.
There was the Regent Theater, the Empire, the Lowe's Midland, the Tower, the Esquire.
You could go to a double feature downtown for a dime.
And then you could go and eat. The dime store had good chili, good fat hot dogs, and hard root beer. Ooh, that was great.
There were a lot of wagons for food, these Greek wagons.
And there used to be these little
orange juice stands.
Yeah, I used to love to go with Dad to Jake Edwards' barbecue.
The Forum cafeteria, the fried chicken was the best, and it was just great. I always thought it was the Ritz-Carlton.
We used to have magnificent tailors, the jewelers, all the little shops that you could buy anything. The hats, Clark the Hatter.
Peck and Peck was there, and Klein's was there, and
Wolf Brothers and Horsfell's and Jackards and Gordon and Koppel, Browning and King, Smeltzer Toy Store, Emery Bird's. There was just no store like it. You had these wonderful elevators with the clocks above each elevator, and I think there were 4, and you'd see the time in England, in Rome, in, I think, in the Orient. And this was just thrilling to a child.
My memories of those stores are the memories of a little boy, his mother's hand locked around his wrist, who was led there and made to sit for at least a lifetime, maybe 2, surrounded by the alien aromas of face powder and lingerie. What I liked about downtown were the spectacles, of which the grandest, surely, was each autumn's American Royal Parade. The crowds, the happy blare of marching bands. There were other spectacles, the most elaborate one long before my time. The week-long Priests of Palace revelry was Kansas City's answer to Mardi Gras. It began in 1887 and continued with an interruption for World War I into the early 1920s. The highlights of the week were the nightly parades with spectacular floats.
That was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. It lighted up. In fact, it was more beautiful than the parades they have today in California.
Oh, my golly, remember those? Now, the minute I say this, and this is a horrible minute, what were they celebrating?
The majesty of commerce was what they were celebrating. The whole affair was an inspiration of civic boosters, staged to draw visitors and their dollars downtown. But one season needed no staged events to pull in the crowds. As youngsters counted down the days to Christmas, the streets filled up with magic, decorations over the avenues, and animated displays in the department store windows. Meantime, a short streetcar ride to the south, another commercial center, the Country Club Plaza, was staking its claim as a major Kansas City attraction. And the plaza marked the season's passages with a style all its own. Crowds gathered for the lighting of the thousands of colored Christmas bulbs that outlined the center's Spanish-style buildings. In spring, parents brought their small fry to play on the giant Easter rabbits, huge concrete bunnies whose eyes glowed an ominous red. The plaza's charms were many.
There was a pony ring down there, and 4 rides for a quarter. And I thought that was the most wonderful thing, and I got to go every Sunday that it wasn't raining.
The plaza was heaven, as far as I was concerned. Just heaven.
It was the convenience of people driving in and parking their car. The plaza was the first shopping center that took into consideration the importance of the automobile and the development of retail business.
In fact, the motor car and the freeways to speed its passage soon would dominate us all, changing, some would say, disfiguring the face of the city. The days of tracks and trolleys were numbered, but none of that had happened quite yet.
We could go streetcar riding. Cars? No, who had a car? But we'd take these passes, we'd ride to the end of the line. We could do anything, we could ride anywhere with the passes.
Remember the little dinky over on 39th Street that ran across town east and west? It was a small streetcar and it used to bounce. Well, when they get to the end of the line, they didn't have a round track, so to speak. The motor got out, took the cord of the thing and swung it around, and then he had controls up to the other end.
As I recall, it was called the Swope Parkway Line, and this streetcar just rocked and rolled going out there all the way. It was a great thrill for us to sit by the window and look out, and the driver let the throttle go.
What we did as a family before we got an automobile, we rode streetcars. And you went to Waldo, it was like going out of town.
The real way out of town, of course, was by train. Union Station churned with life at almost every hour of day and night. Excited crowds of travelers, redcaps pushing carts of luggage, conductors at the gates calling out wondrous destinations. That was the place we left from and came back to on the important journeys of our lives. away to school or to visit far-off family, home on military leave. And even if you were going nowhere, the Fred Harvey restaurants in the station were destinations in themselves. The Westport Room's hefty steak, served not 10 minutes from the stockyards, had a far-flung reputation. Passenger trains, like the streetcars, were all but doomed. But the machines that would supplant them were still something of a novelty, and the little airfield in the bend of the river was an attraction in its own right.
I liked the old airport. It was marvelous, that wonderful restaurant, and it was so easy to get to, and I could just sit there and watch people come and go and have fun.
TWA was our hometown airline. Long before I ever rode one, I remember slipping down to stand on the levee at the runway's south end and watch those great metal birds thunder off bow overhead. A lot of our pleasures were of that common sort. Amateur ball games in season, winter sledding in parks or on the lightly traveled streets, or just passing time in our own yards with whatever toys were the rage of the day. And regardless of the season, in every neighborhood, the movie theater, the picture show we called it then, was a favorite meeting place.
Well, everybody went to Lincoln just about on Sundays. We had another theater, we had the gym, but the Lincoln always had first run movies.
Down to the Isis Theater at 31st and Troost, because we live right near there. And let's see, the Apollo Theater.
In Armourdale, we used to have a movie house there. It was called the Kansas Theater, and charge a nickel.
Saturday afternoon, everybody gathered at the Brookside Theater for the afternoon movies.
Every Saturday, we'd do the same thing, you know, whatever movie, Errol Flynn or whatever. There were always great movies, and we had a great time.
The price of a movie, or of anything 50 or more years ago, sounds like pure fiction today.
I remember I could go out on a date and maybe spend $4 and have a great time. I did. I don't know whether she did or not.
Back when dancing still was a civil art, not high-impact aerobics, there were a good many ballrooms in the city. The dance pavilion at Wynwood Park was a favorite. El Torreon was another. But the Playmore at 32nd and Main was the top of the line.
And they had all the main bands there too, and that big shiny ball that just shined all over. It was just beautiful. I enjoyed it. I used to go almost every week.
I met a beautiful lady there, man. I married her.
You dress up, put on your finest duds, and pick up your girl and go down there and dance up a storm and have a great time.
And always we looked ahead to the sounds of spring. Not the chirp of robins, but the roar of the crowd and the sharp crack of bat on ball. Up until the 40s, sports still were largely segregated, so our town's two professional teams, the American Association Blues and the Monarchs of the Negro League, played in the same ballpark, but on different days and to largely different fans.
I never paid as a youngster to see a ball game. We had a favorite tree outside the ballpark on 22nd. I'd sit on that tree and watch the game, or else they had a big hole in the fence where you can watch it from.
My mother never ate a hot dog unless it was at the ballpark. They just didn't taste the same anywhere else.
The Blues were a AAA minor league team, a New York Yankees farm club. But the Monarchs, in talent at least, clearly were the majors. For their fans, Monarchs opening day was one of the year's milestone events.
All the women wore hats, high heels, and although it was in the springtime and it didn't call for it, they might have on furs that were just flying practically everywhere. And many of them that went didn't know too much about baseball, but they knew they had to be there that day.
Then the hot fist of summer closed again, and people looked for relief where they could find it. Cliff Drive, overlooking the East Bottoms and the river, was a favorite spot.
We couldn't wait to get to the spring water. Oh, there'd just be people there just with their jugs and their bottles. They're ready to get that beautiful, clear spring water. And you'd see Lover's Lane. There was a Lover's Lane there. You see cars parked. You're just mooching, making love, whatever.
When I was a child, my parents told about happy times spent along Cliff Drive when they were courting. They didn't speak of what happened in the car. Swimming was one way to escape the heat. My friends and I rode our bikes to the Swope Park pool. In those days of separate, but rarely equal, black youngsters had the Parade Park pool. And for the adventurous, there were less frequented, and without doubt less sanitary spots.
The boys used to swim down at the river. And, you know, in the river, they would dump various things from the packing plants. And you thinking, chlorinating the pools now, you kind of wonder, how did we ever survive?
If you were lucky, you spent part of your summer at day camp, or on outings with your Boy Scout or Girl Scout troop. For children of immigrants especially, joining the Scouts was a good way to be part of the mainstream. Kansas City's park system was unmatched for its time, and all through the fair weather, people passed as much time as they could outdoors.
We spent a lot of time down in Gillum Park. I mean, we were just down there playing all the time, hide and seek and running through the woods.
We would go to Bud Park, and we might have 2,000 or 3,000 people just for a band concert.
Every summer, our church would have a picnic at Swope Park. Now, there was an area there they called Watermelon Hill. We didn't realize it then, and I know the people that designated this area for us didn't realize it. It was the best area in the park.
A tradition for the 4th of July among all the Mexican people was to go to Swope Park the 3rd of July and camp out. And then in the morning where you have all this stuff, all them goodies, burning them tortillas and all that stuff.
When we would get in the car and Mother would take us for a ride, we would always pray that we could head south so we could go to Fairland Park.
Here, in what's now just a weedy field, there once was a place of bedazzlement and wonder. And through this turnstile, long ago rusted shut, generations of us used to pass on our way to fabulous pleasure. There have been other, earlier amusement parks. One, if you still remember, is Electric Park. Not at its original location in the East Bottoms, but its reincarnation in 1907 at 46th and Paseo, at what then was the South City limits.
If you could prevail on your family to stay, there was a lake, and these nude statues would rise up out of the water, had lights on them. Oh, I think it was about 10 o'clock. We just begged our parents to let us stay and see this.
But Electric Park's successor at 75th and Prospect topped them all.
Fairland had more rides. It had more of the features to thrill and excite and scare teenagers. Of course, the roller coaster was the big thrill of most of the parks, and the higher and the straighter down it would go, the more of a thrill that it was. That was the main attraction.
Everybody said, well, it's not sturdy and all that stuff. Well, you know, it scared the hell out of you.
My own memories of the place are oddly mixed. One is of the huge excitement of annual school outings to the park. A teacher's nightmare, I'm sure, because it was our one chance for a little unruliness. But another memory, which still stings just a little, is how, if the family budget was lean, you never seemed to have enough dimes and quarters in your pocket to take quite as many rides as some of your schoolmates.
I was always the same way, and I had to sort of plot which rides I was going to take, which ones had some social implication that might be enjoyable.
Fairyland survived 2 fires and a lightning strike in the 30s and 40s. But its bloom was passing. And after a ruinous windstorm in 1977, the music ended and the lights went out for good. I don't know if I ever sat in this little car, or even what ride it was a part of. We have grander, slicker amusement parks now, but for those who remember, I doubt that any can ever match the glitzy, glittery splendor that was Fairyland.